I want to welcome onto the stage Josette, who is the team leader for emission-free mobility from the city of Amsterdam, and then Henk, who is the president of the European Cyclists Federation. So let's give them a warm welcome, applause here, get kicked off.
Thank you.
Because it's just the three of us, I told them I'm going to ask them hard questions. And not only that, but also we'll give some room for you all to ask questions if you want. So either raise a hand or put a thumb up or two thumbs up, depending on how enthusiastically you want to ask the question. And we'll make this a bit more of a dynamic conversation. So with that said, how to unlock micromobility's climate potential? I was so happy to finally see something like this on the Micromobility Europe set of programming, and especially happy to have both of you here to be able to talk about it because you're bringing slightly different perspectives. So the advocate perspective, the policy maker's perspective, and then the NGO perspective. So it's like a policymaker, an NGO, and an advocate walk into a bar, and what do they talk about? They talk about the climate potential of micromobility. It's just going to be fascinating. So Josette, I actually want to start with you, and I want to start more on a personal note. Okay, well, actually, let's do this.
Yeah.
First, I want you to talk about what it means to be the team leader for emission-free mobility in the city of Amsterdam. And then we're going to get personal.
Okay. So, of course, I have the coolest job in the city of Amsterdam because I love mobility.
The mayor doesn't? Just you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I love mobility. I come from a background of mobility. It has my personal preference. I like the startup scene in this area. I like the spirit, the energy, the transition that we're in. I love working together with organizations, companies from the city of Amsterdam, and of course also being part of shaping an Amsterdam, a city that will be much cleaner, much better, more spaceful, more green to live in. I love my job. I have a fantastic team.
Yeah, how large is your team?
We have 45 people in the team.
45 people?
45 people.
On an emissions-free mobility team.
And this is zero emission mobility.
Okay, you got to define that for us.
Yeah.
So what counts?
So what counts is that at the moment we have environmental zones in the city of Amsterdam, which means that we are restricting cars from entering the city if they're polluting too much. And we're transitioning to a new normal, and that new normal is fully electric or emission-free. So
walking counts.
Walking counts as well, of course. Yeah. So that means, and we actually have a bit of news because this week our government in the city of Amsterdam has approved our plans for 2025. And 2025 is a big milestone for the city of Amsterdam because from that moment, all new vans, cabs, scooters, touring cars. There's a lot of a big wide area, but also small boats. All new ones need to be emission-free. So that's a big step, basically, in our transition to become zero emission in 2030.
And that's Amsterdam, or that's the Netherlands?
That's Amsterdam, unfortunately.
Just Amsterdam?
No, not just Amsterdam. If you look at transportation, we're with 39 other governments in the Netherlands. So we're not doing this alone as Amsterdam. So vans and trucks will be emission-free, so all the new ones from 2025 onwards in 40 cities in the Netherlands.
I'm going to let Henk speak in a second, but now I'm curious. Are you nervous about that? Are there going to be enough?
Okay. Of course. I think if you're doing something which is quite, we're within this transition, right? Yeah. And there are a lot of challenges here. Basically, the availability of trucks. Yeah. Energy congestion. Right. Do we have enough charging
Good luck with the grid. Yeah, I've heard the Netherlands grid is amazing, very resilient, 99.9% or something uptime.
It is amazing, and we just passed the milestone of having 3,000 charging poles in Amsterdam, which makes us a fantastic city if you're an e-rider. But of course, I'm nervous and curious if we can make this together with the companies in the Netherlands that need to make that transition in the coming years.
Sure. Yeah. And just maybe one final question, and then Henk, I promise I'm going to ask you. So emissions-free mobility zones right now, do you have any? No, there's no emissions-free.
They're environmental zones at the moment,
Environmental zones,
which
okay.
are restricting,
Okay.
and we're moving to emission-free
How do you
zones.
restrict? Do you use technology to restrict?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not using people to check on that.
Yeah.
That will be a waste of time. We use cameras.
Okay. For those of you who have jobs doing that,
Yeah,
it's
but
fine.
that's the
Good.
thing, right? You can only check on a certain amount of cars on a daily basis. We have cameras around the whole periphery in the ring, as we call it in Amsterdam.
Oh, interesting.
So if
Okay.
you enter the city and we catch you,
So I've been on camera this whole time. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, that would have changed some decisions. So Henk, so wonderful to have you on this panel as well. Very glad that you're going to be able to join us as our advocate representative. I'm sure everybody here knows what the European Cycling Federation is, but maybe just talk a little bit about what it is, how it fits into the rest of the advocacy landscape, especially in the Netherlands.
I'm not sure if everybody knows what the European Cyclists Federation is. In many countries in Europe, there is a national cyclist federation of which individual citizens are members. Our association is the European umbrella for those, and even for some organizations outside Europe. So we have an office in Brussels. We have 25 people. What we do there is we lobby for cycling, emission-free mobility on 2, 3, or 4 wheels with at least a bit of pedal power. At the European level. So with the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council, because of course cycling is something that par excellence you do locally. However, it is governed by legislation which is even being made at the European level. So we lobby there, which is really old-fashioned lobby work, talking to civil servants, participating in stakeholder groups, talking to politicians, trying to drum up support. So we get legislation that favors cycling, micromobility, and that we work against legislation which would have a negative impact. For instance, a couple of years ago, we have really put up a big fight together with the industry against obligatory insurance for e-bikes.
Oh, good.
Because if that would have been decided at the European level, the market would have fallen off the cliff. But then on the positive side, we have with success achieved that new train sets in Europe all will need to have dedicated space for transporting bicycles. We have opened up the possibility for lower VAT rates on bicycle purchase, bicycle rental, bicycle repair. So that's the carrots, let's say. We do a couple of other things. Every year we organize a huge congress which is only about cycling. It's a lot bigger than this one, but it's only about cycling, no other forms of micromobility, called Velocity. We coordinate at the European level the long distance network, Eurovelo, where you can cycle from Dublin to Istanbul, or from Malaga to the North Cape, or just along the Rhine or along the Danube. We do that.
Wonderful. Yeah.
We do the joint marketing, branding, certification, quality control. And we do projects for governments, for regions, for local governments. We try to connect cities, regions, exchanging best practices, lessons learned, etc. So basically, we are the voice of cycling and cyclists at the European level.
Yeah. I'm now remembering that I've actually been to Velocity, and it was in Vienna. And one of the most special concerts I've ever been to was a concert there because they did the concert with bike bells. So it was a bike bell concert. Can you imagine? It was actually really pretty. No, Henk, you don't believe me. You're like, that doesn't sound good.
I wasn't there, but I can imagine because every conference has its official song, for instance, and it's also the only congress I know that concludes with a night of dancing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It does.
With
That's
bikes?
always every Velocity.
Okay.
The Thursday night, we go dancing.
Okay, well, this has now become an advertisement for
1,500 people.
Velocity. Yeah.
Next year in Ghent.
You get an
Next year in
invitation.
Ghent. Fantastic. So, Henk, tell us, why did you join the European Cyclists Federation?
I am new to the mobility world.
You are? Okay.
I've been a professional diplomat for more than 30 years. And that's indeed how I ended up here. I'm Dutch. I'm born in the Netherlands.
Okay, we didn't know. Yeah.
When I turned 6, my parents told me, there's your school, there's your bicycle, go. And since then, I've always been cycling to school, to university, to work. Also when I was living abroad, and I never gave it another thought. A bicycle was for me a means to get where I needed to go in an easy and efficient way, and I didn't really think much about it. So I became ambassador to Finland in 2012, and I took my bike to work, and people there, they raised their eyebrows. It ended up in the newspaper. The ambassador...
You were in the newspaper because you were
the ambassador
cycling.
for Fiets's limousine. You know, I had a car with a driver, and I chose
and then the
to
limousine
cycle
was
to
behind
work.
you?
Sorry?
Okay, and the limousine was behind you, was trailing behind you?
No.
No. Okay, yeah.
No, we got him another job. Anyway, so it ended up in the newspaper, and then later on I was approached by Finnish local cycling activists who said, "You're from Holland, we want to cycle like in Holland, you must help us." Yeah. And I thought it was a fun idea, so I got in touch with the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Many of you may have heard of them. It's like a network that tries to spread, a network of mostly companies and local authorities who try to spread Dutch cycling know-how and expertise abroad. So they came over to Finland, we did workshops. I went with the Finnish activists to see the mayor, because, you know, you have easier entry when you bring along an ambassador. So I became a kind of a mascot for the Finnish cycling activists. And then I was posted to Denmark. And in Denmark, they were not waiting for a Dutch ambassador who was going to tell them how to cycle.
Oh, yeah.
There's always a bit of antagonism between Denmark and the Netherlands there, right?
Okay.
But I stayed somehow involved with the cycling community, and then I was asked whether I would be a candidate for the board of the European Cyclists Federation, because it was full of people who were very good at cycling.
And not very good at diplomacy.
No,
Okay.
well, exactly. So
Yeah.
I was duly elected, and 2 years later I was president. I left the Foreign Service, and here I am now.
Wow.
So what I do, I travel, I speak to governments, decision makers, politicians, and sit in sofas like this. This
said
thing
this
is
is
really
American-sized
enormous.
sofa.
This is for
Yeah,
an American who doesn't cycle.
Oh, wow. Okay, that was a clap. Oh my gosh, this audience is harsh. All right, you know, we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that later. Okay, wait, one other question though. How many meetings a day do you have?
Sorry?
How many meetings a day do you have? You must have so many meetings. With advocacy and
many
everything
days.
else.
Since the pandemic, of course,
Yeah.
many of them are
Or Zoom.
online
Okay.
through Zoom.
Okay.
So on average, 2-3 meetings a day.
Okay, all right,
But
that's
this
okay.
is not a job for me, right? This is
a
like
side hustle. Yes.
it's
Okay.
volunteer work.
Sounds like heaven.
Yeah. Josette, maybe, okay, I know we're going to actually talk about climate potential, but I do want to hear, how did you get this job? How did you...
Sorry, how did I get this job?
How were you, did you get voluntold? They said, Josette, you're a top performer. We need you to do this.
So I didn't work in government up till last year. So I'm new.
Oh, interesting.
So I used to work at a company providing charging stations. I was responsible for the software team over there. And before that, I used to work at TomTom, also being responsible for traffic information and providing that easily to people in the car. I think what happened with me is that I saw that commercial companies are not moving fast enough in this whole transition.
And government's going to move faster.
I believe. Because if you look at how many people are enthusiastic about leaving their car behind and stepping on an electric bike or a cargo bike or taking public transport, not moving fast enough. And we have a huge climate issue and we have a huge potential. And we need companies that are here today to make that transition happen. But people have habits and they will not move out of themselves. So you can do a lot of good stuff by making very good products that are easy to use with a nice user interface. You can promote it. You can have heavy marketing, subsidies. But in the end, if you really want to change the world, you need to have policies. And those policies need to basically stimulate people to make the right decisions. that are not maybe always the right decisions for themselves, right? Because it will take them a longer time to go to work or a longer time to go to a shopping area, or maybe you need to get your package from Amazon instead of having it delivered at your home. And government is helping by putting regulation in, by providing subsidies, by facilitating the market to move faster. And that's why I made this step, which nobody else I've met up till now has moved into government to increase the speed of things. So I'm always
It is
asked,
kind of a unique take. Yeah.
is that really true? But yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah, interesting. I have to say, I disagree with you a little bit about this point on how regulation has to kind of force people into different decisions. I think one of the reasons why I really liked micromobility is because I felt that the various form factors that the tech itself has were actually much better suited to how people really move about space. And I don't want to say for everybody or in every situation, but it just seemed to me like we were force fitting something that was good for, one, design case onto everybody else. And micromobility was a bit more diverse in that way.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? No.
Yeah, so maybe I'm talking about a different level than you're talking about. I'm truly for opportunities for people to make the best decision. But by taking away in Amsterdam, for example, we've taken away around 3,000 parking spots at the moment. By 2025, we'll be taking away 10,000 parking spots. We're implementing emission-free zones. We're getting people together to learn from each other. There's this plumbing organization in the Netherlands, and they basically had people in the cars, in the vans, for decades, right? They've been around for over 70 years. So everybody's used to having their van with all the equipment in their van. They have their space for their lunch. They're used to that. But what they did, which is very special, is they moved to micromobility. They said, okay, it will be much easier to go into the city of Amsterdam with a cargo bike. It will be much better. It's less weight. It's less pollution. It's less space. It's easier to get into the city center of Amsterdam. But they had true difficulties, basically motivating their people who had their big van. It was just like their home, right? During work. It's like their space. But by stimulating, by presenting regulation that's upcoming, you basically stimulate the creativity. And they are a true example of where we see that now they've basically changed their whole way of working. So first they send one person to the area where the problem is. They identify the problem. They give back the information. They say, okay, for the plumbing exercise, they need this and this and this equipment. So they don't go in with the full equipment. They go in with a cargo bike with specific equipment needed for the job. So that whole van is not necessary anymore. So you're in a situation where you stimulate and where you regulate, and efficiency and creativity and innovation basically prevails.
Yeah. It's interesting. Even with that example, I'm starting to calculate the emissions savings and avoidance of just what you're
huge.
talking about.
They're huge.
And I actually want you to talk about that a little bit. So how are you starting to quantify the climate potential of micromobility? First of all, it sounds like you think there is a climate potential of micromobility. Okay.
Definitely.
And is everybody in Amsterdam convinced of that?
So we have a lot of
Everyone
people
here
working at the
convinced of that,
city center of Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So we're providing climate reports, and we're doing a big job to basically spread that information throughout the city of Amsterdam. So last Monday we had a climate event, and we're spreading that news because not everybody in the city of Amsterdam is basically in favor, right? So there are a lot of people that come from the old days and the old models where basically we're providing most of the space on the road to the cars, to the vans, to the trucks, right? If you look at the typical car in Amsterdam, we have very narrow streets, but most space on the street is owned by the car. There are models for that. So we need to change those models. But those models are taught in university. So we need to change education. We need to change those models. We need to change the beliefs of people. So we're talking a lot about the vision. how do we see basically Amsterdam in the future, green, more space for our people. So that helps. Not talking about restriction, but talking about
Opportunity,
our joint belief and our joint future. What our people in Amsterdam, they're entitled to clean air, they're entitled to trees, they're entitled to space.
And in your greenhouse gas emissions inventories and things like that, are you capturing all of the data? Okay.
Yeah, so we have an ambition of 60% reduction
By
CO2 emission.
No, by what date?
By 2050.
Only 60%. Okay.
Yeah, so we are part of that.
Yeah.
So with our emission-free programs, we are part of that ambition. So 20% of CO2 emission is caused by transport, logistics in Amsterdam. So we have a huge contribution to make in that space. Micromobility, if we look at the average van in Amsterdam, it's filled up by 20%. So that means there are a lot of vans going into restaurants, into shops that are just partly filled. And that's not efficient, right? So we should not only replace fossil transportation by electric or emission-free transportation. At the same time, we need to be far more efficient in how we distribute our goods in the city.
Yeah, interesting. So have you set targets specifically around micromobility's contribution to those emissions reductions?
No, not specifically.
Okay.
So basically the ambition is generic,
Yeah.
But we stimulate. So we don't want to basically tell the market, okay, you should take a van or an electric scooter or a cargo bike or maybe a pedal bike. We don't want to do that. We do want to stimulate. So for example, hubs, if you look at the gas stations nowadays, we're working together with the market to transition them into hubs, into energy hubs. Those are also areas where micromobility have fantastic opportunities. So we have E-Olympic, which is near the Olympic Stadium. That's on TenderNet at the moment. So we provide opportunities there for micromobility organizations to be part of that pilot, so to say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
interesting. Henk, for you, is everybody in the Cycling Federation convinced that micromobility is a good thing for the climate?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah? Okay, what about a good thing, period?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. No,
So yes, yeah.
It is. And I really admire what Josette is doing, because in a city like Amsterdam, the challenge is even bigger, because so much of the transport is already zero emission in Amsterdam. And therefore, I understand why you're focusing on logistics, professionals, etc., because private cars is not the big emitter in Amsterdam. But in other cities, it is, of course, like that. I don't know, Julia, whether we have time. I can tell you when we went to COP26.
Tell us. Yeah, we have time.
In Glasgow. There was a guy there who was signaling. COP26, the climate negotiations annually. Next year, or this year in Abu Dhabi, last year in Egypt, and the year before that in Glasgow. So we decided to register as an NGO and to go there. And for me, I mean, I have been at many international conferences, but I was absolutely shocked to the extent by which this conference had been hijacked by the vested interests of the fossil fuel industry and the automotive industry. This was the first time that transport
You were
was
surprised by
on
that?
the top of
Yeah.
the agenda. But it gets worse. The biggest pavilions in there, this is a climate conference, right? Were indeed BP, Shell, Saudi Arabia, BMW, Toyota, Volkswagen, and a couple of others. They were in the conference area where the diplomats were negotiating about this transport declaration. They were showcasing cars, even Formula One cars. Not Formula E cars, Formula One cars.
Oh, interesting. Not Formula E.
At the climate conference.
Oof.
We were not allowed to bring a bike inside.
Did you bring one in
for security
anyways?
reasons.
Did you bring one in anyways?
Sorry?
Did you bring one in anyways?
No. Security wouldn't allow
Oh,
it.
okay, darn.
No, security
I thought,
wouldn't allow
Henk,
it.
you were a rule breaker. Yeah.
But local cyclists, they created a picket line outside the fence where all the delegates had to pass, all
Beautiful.
these cyclists. But then we got hold of a draft of the declaration that the governments were going to agree on. And this was a declaration about the decarbonization of transport. And it was only about electric cars and a bit about charging infrastructure. No public transport, no shared mobility, no micromobility, nothing of the sort. And then we made a big fuss. We really started a lobby there inside the room, talking to the diplomats, to the ministers, getting some governments on side to change the text of the declaration. And eventually we achieved that. But what the big lesson is that we are really up against a huge conglomerate of vested interests. Yeah. And it's such a big ecosystem. It's not just automotive. It's fuel, it's insurance, it's tires, it's parts.
It's the infrastructure,
it's a whole,
it's
an enormous ecosystem. Which has very deep pockets. I mean, I told you we have 25 people in our office in Brussels. I think the car industry has over 1,000. So that's what we're up against. But for the climate, and that's what we're talking about, climate actually. And normally I have a couple of slides, but Horace showed them yesterday.
Okay.
Let's say transport is 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's the only sector where it's still rising. Energy, housing, agriculture, they're all going down, but transportation is still rising. About 40% of that is private cars. And then there's aviation, shipping, etc. But 40% is private cars. We are never, ever going to achieve our climate goals if we don't change that. And changing all ICE cars for electric cars is going to take too long, and we don't have the resources.
Meaning the actual component parts.
Component parts, battery materials, etc.
Energy.
Or it will take too long. Still, 95% of the cars worldwide are ICE cars. They will stay on the road for another 20 years in advanced countries, and then they will move on to less advanced markets. So they will stay on the road for maybe 30 years, 40 years, which is much too long if whether we're aiming for 2030, 2040, or 2050, we're not going to make it. And that's why I should ask Josette, for people in Amsterdam who own a private car, ICE car, it may be the last car they own.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
But who is going to tell them?
So we are telling them, because it's not only a transition to electric, it's also a transition to shared mobility. And by taking away all those parking spots and basically motivating people to use a shared car, you give people that choice, right? Their next car will not be a self-owned car. It might be a shared car or maybe a shared cargo bike. But what I miss a bit in your story is the active mobility. So in Amsterdam, of course, we have a lot of people that are already on a bike. So maybe we're a bit of a different situation than in other parts of the world. But with us, the active mobility is very important as well. So what we see at the moment is also a transition from people on a bike, a normal bike, moving to electric bikes, moving to electric scooters, moving to electric mopeds, for example. We see that in other cities in the world. From an Amsterdam perspective, micromobility is a good thing when you're replacing a van or a car. If you're replacing an active mobility form like a normal bike, then as a city, we also need to think about the health of the people. And that's why in Amsterdam, we're not stimulating all means of micromobility. For example, we don't have mopeds. And that's not only having to do, because it's easy to say, right? That's the federal government in the Netherlands, that's The Hague, right? In Amsterdam, we cannot do anything because it's with The Hague. But that's not totally the truth. Also, from a City of Amsterdam perspective, we see the challenges basically that all those mopeds bring in the cities around us. And I've tried lots of them. I love them. On the pavement of Amsterdam, it will be quite difficult, but we also see the challenges in cities like Oslo, in Paris. They're struggling basically with the free floating model. They're struggling with the speed, with the accidents. So also as the city of Amsterdam, we also try to stimulate the active mobility more, but also in addition to micromobility.
I should have clarified that in my introduction, that we are not a micromobility advocacy, we are a cycling advocacy.
Exactly.
So it must be active. So we draw the line at anything where you don't have to move your legs like this, we will not
Interesting.
advocate for.
That's
So
that's a big line.
throttle bikes, no. E-scooters, no.
Oh,
Okay.
E-bike,
interesting. Okay, Henk, we
yes.
should have talked about this
That's
earlier.
not the
Otherwise, we
case
could have
for
really gotten into how to
Amsterdam,
unlock the
right? So we
And
micromobility
it's not
potential.
not specifically for Amsterdam, but
Yeah.
that's where because that's where we come from.
Sure.
We come from active
Sure.
mobility,
Yeah,
and we are
exactly.
not
Yeah.
a micromobility advocacy. We're a cycling advocacy.
I know, but from a
So
climate
it means
potential
you must
perspective,
move
you have
your
to be a
legs.
micromobility advocate. Yeah, I was going to say from a climate potential perspective, you have to be a micromobility advocate. And I know we're getting to time, and I know we're getting to time, and we're going to move on in a second here. But I just want to say this is one of those panels too where I wish I was actually a panelist as well. So just a couple of things that I want to kind of pick up on. One is at this conference, I've been having so many conversations about life cycle emissions, which is such a wonderful conversation to have, especially over a coffee, where we've been talking about electric vehicles versus micromobility vehicles, and the fact that when we're talking about emissions for EVs, most people just completely forget all of the different scopes of emissions, not to mention what you were talking about in terms of resource intensive. Not anybody in this room, don't worry, you all know about life cycle emissions, but certainly when I'm having conversations with other people who are in the carbon-free transportation space, EVs are seen as a panacea. And I think actually Horace said something similar to that yesterday, which is we're kind of like using EVs as our savior rather than thinking about redefining a model altogether. But what that means is if we're going to actually use micromobility as for climate potential, is that you have to make micromobility a very viable option. So, you know, every time I come to Amsterdam, the beautiful separated bike lanes pop immediately to mind. The fact that you do feel safe, knowing that drivers see so many different cyclists, that it makes quite a difference. And also, you can't get around density. So I think, you know, as we're thinking about micromobility and how to unlock micromobility's climate potential, you can't get away from housing, you can't get away from land use, you can't get away from some of those things that seem like hard solutions but really aren't. When you put your mind to it. So maybe let me make this the last question, which is if you were going to do just one thing to unlock micromobility's climate potential, what would it be?
Sorry, it's going to be two things.
Okay, fine, Henk. And you said you weren't a rule breaker.
Disruptor, yeah. When we ask people why they don't use micromobility,
Sure.
they say, I don't feel safe.
Yep.
So one is safety. It's one thing actually, that's safety. But it has two components. One is infrastructure, which you mentioned.
Yep.
The other is legislation.
Okay.
Maximum speeds
Oh, yes, speed limits.
for cars
Okay.
in particular.
All right.
Because you cannot always create separate
Yeah.
infrastructure, as Josette will confirm. You don't have the space in existing built-up environments.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Safety,
Okay.
and that will
infrastructure.
automatically
Yeah.
bring access.
Okay.
So maybe to add to that, so
Is this going to be one thing or two things? Three.
in Amsterdam, we're moving our 50 kilometer per hour street speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour. So that's a big thing for the city of Amsterdam. As you mentioned, not all streets in Amsterdam are wide enough for separated bike lanes, right? So it's very important for companies to offer micromobility that there's potential limitations on the speed, or at least ensure that your people are aware when they're on their cargo bike or their electric bike, doesn't matter, that they are aware of the speed limits and you're helping them, you're supporting them to do the right thing. Because people in government, they are aware of the safety issues. If they talk about micromobility, they talk about safety and they talk about space or free floating. Free floating in government is basically the worst nightmare, right? Because if you are in a wheelchair, you cannot be on the pavement. There's bikes everywhere or scooters everywhere. It's a big challenge for local governments to handle. So you want to do the good thing, work together with the government, ensure that the speeds are, the users are made speed aware, that there are speed limits that are easily to implement, right? So we don't have to control that. That's much better if the market is doing that. And at the same time that we work together to ensure that it's no free floating, but that we offer spaces to the organization to park the cargo bikes or to park the e-bikes, so that they're in certain areas and they're not polluting the whole pavement in the city.
Okay, excellent. Well, next time I am going to invite myself as a panelist, and I'll have somebody else be a facilitator so that we can make this a proper debate.
You'll join us.
About which policies can unlock climate potential for micromobility. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to the panelists.